Do people hear me now? They should probably hear me, at least. I don't know. Well, I'm not looking at the chat. Okay, so people hear me now. Now let me go into DOMs
I don't hear
and
me.
see if this works. I have a
Oh,
feeling. Uh,
yeah, there you go. That's working now.
Wait, it's working now?
Yeah.
Hey, look at that. Oh,
Okay,
wow.
I'm gonna mute Twitch again so I don't hear myself. So we should probably almost start over.
Start
Hi.
over. Let's pretend, just pretend none of that ever happened and that we were just talking about nonsense. Um,
um. Well, that sucks.
okay, here,
So
let's just give the TLDR version. Hubs is still a thing.
yeah,
Uh, we're going to continue working on hubs. Mozilla continues to support hubs, and we love everybody who's out there using it. Um, what we're talking about today, though, is materials. We get a lot of questions about how materials work in hubs. How do I get transparency working right? My textures aren't showing up. What am I doing wrong? All these kind of questions. And that's not really a hub specific thing. We're really talking about the glTF format and
hmm
how you get your stuff working for glTF. But it's still a question we get all the time. So we thought that we'd start to cover some of that stuff today. And we were just talking about this, but we can repeat it anyway since our audio wasn't working. Before I show the website, I want to make sure audio is working in my other little settings here. Hang on, I'm going to switch over. Dom and I are going to try to talk and make sure that people
yeah. I
hear.
hear. I have the Twitch stream going and I can hear us. So I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it on Twitch though. So I think we're. Yeah.
Oh no,
I just heard what
uh,
I just said.
should be working now. And I'm going to check on my Blender stuff. I still hear me. Can you talk, Dom?
I'm
All
talking.
right, we're good. And I think we're all good.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway,
Little
so we were going to
paranoid.
talk about glTF and why it's cool and why do we use it. And so we were looking at the glTF website, the Kronos
Yeah, if you were
website.
wondering why we were scrolling through that, yeah. So we were talking about glTF as a format, but basically glTF, and we've talked about this a little bit on previous streams. But glTF is kind of the JPEG of 3D models. It's a standard that is that kind of more and more people are starting to use. It's optimized for runtime, so a lot of other 3D formats are kind of more optimized for authoring time or for editing. glTF is specifically optimized for runtime, so it's all the data in a glTF is kind of ready to take and then upload directly to the GPU with minimal processing. So it's like really efficient to be able to use for real time applications. And yeah, you can see there's tons of people using it. The format is quite easy to parse and read. I mean, the other problem with a lot of other formats like FBX is a completely proprietary format, and so any loaders for FBX are kind of like this reverse engineered mess of stuff. glTF is like a really straightforward format. All the data that is not mesh and image data or whatever is all in JSON format. Like all the metadata is JSON, and then all the
And so
mesh
that
and
means you
image
can
and
basically edit it as a text file, which
yeah,
is pretty
which
rare
is really
for
useful for
image formats and 3D formats in general. Usually it's a
yeah.
bunch of binary garbage you'll never understand.
Which is really so the text format's really useful for debugging and that sort of stuff to be able to look at it and edit it by hand. And a lot of times early on, like before we had the Blender exporter, for example, like we were just editing them by hand to add components, which is definitely useful. And then also we've gotten questions about like what's the difference between a GLB and a GLTF. So a GLB is just a GLTF kind of with all of its external assets bundled into it. So normally you'll have a GLTF file, a bin file, and then maybe some image files to go along with that GLTF. GLB just basically takes all that data and puts it all into one file. They're semantically exactly the same. Like a GLTF and a GLB both have all the same features. They can both do all the same things, but a GLB just brings all the files into one file. And in hubs, we use GLBs for everything. So like when you're uploading an avatar, or when you're importing an asset into Spoke or into Hubs, or when you're creating a scene, those are all GLB files, just because it makes it a lot easier to to deal with not having to deal with multiple files. Because if you have a GLTF, you might have images, and those images might have to be in a directory, and then we kind of have to preserve that directory structure when you upload it. So it's just a whole bunch of we avoid whole bunch of kind of confusing things
Confusing
you might
stuff,
have
and
to deal with.
also
Yeah,
user error of like, oh,
exactly. Yeah,
you uploaded your file, oh, but did you drag in all the textures? Oh, I forgot about that. You know, that
right.
kind of
Or like
stuff.
you dragged them in, but you didn't. You dragged them in when you were inside the folder instead of outside. So now the reference, the paths are different. Like all sorts of ugly stuff that can happen by having all these separate files. By putting it all into one file, you know, we avoid all that, and we actually do stuff where even though like for an avatar, I mean, this is totally like internal stuff, but like for an avatar, when you give us like you drag in the GLB, we actually then turn that into a glTF, right in the browser, and we upload a glTF. This is for like caching reasons, um, but like we can. It's very easy to switch back and forth between these two formats, and so like I said, like we always have our input format be GLB, but that doesn't mean that we always serve up GLBs. Like sometimes we'll use GLTS for certain things because having the files split up means that we can cache them. And so for avatars specifically, the reason we do this is you might have multiple avatars using the same mesh but just reskinned, and that way the browser can cache the avatar mesh data separately from the texture data and the maps that you're reusing. Anyway, this is a whole side thing, but like basically GLTF and GLB are exactly the same. You can convert freely between them. There are a bunch of tools to do that. So when you see that, whenever we say GLTF, we kind of use them interchangeably. We'll
Right.
say
And if
GLTF,
somebody,
GLB.
let's say you have a an artist or a client or somebody says, "Oh, hey, we're trying to get this thing into VR, or we're trying to do this thing, and we have all the models, and here's these GLTFs or GLBs. We don't know what to do with them." That kind of stuff comes up. If you do need to convert from one format to another, again, go. I encourage you to go to the Kronos website here. There are links on this page, especially down toward the end, of all kinds of uh, converters and ways of getting it from one format to another. If you just look up these references and stuff. So, um, uh, fortunately, things like Sketchfab do some of this stuff automatically, which is really great.
Hmm.
If you upload a file to Sketchfab, all you have to do is wait a little while. Sometimes it takes minutes. Sometimes it's like like half a day. I don't know what. It's probably server load and things like
It's
that.
probably like a queue, yeah.
Yeah, but like I've had, a model, I drag and drop my FBX or whatever into Sketchfab, I set it up, and then you just wait a little while, and they already generated a glTF for you. So if you tell somebody to download it or you download it yourself later, it's awesome. Today we're
Yeah, and
actually
that's
going to do that.
and that's the way we're able to just directly import Sketchfab models into hubs is because they expose this GLTF version of each model. We can actually pull them in, um, which is quite nice.
Yeah. Now the questions that we're going to get to really are mostly about like, well, how do I get it how do I get my materials specifically?
Mhm.
Because that's maybe the hardest part about the glTF format. Everything else is, a model is a model, and exporting it is pretty basic. But setting up the material graph or your shader graph properly so that it shows up in on the web or wherever you're using it the way that you want, it can be a little bit tricky. So Blender does this in kind of automatically. If you import a glTF into Blender, it will do its best to try to parse what it's supposed to look like in the shader graph. Doesn't always get it totally right, and there is a tendency for it to be a little heavy-handed and add like extra nodes that you may not need. But we can get into that. If you're looking for reference on how Blender expects materials to be set up, you can go to the Blender reference manual. It's just like docs.blender.org. And they have their manual there for whatever version you're using. Did 2.9 drop? Because now this is the default. I'm guessing it.
I think
Did it actually come out like today
I
and I
thought
missed it?
maybe I thought it was coming out sometime next week, but maybe it came out today. And if it did,
Well,
we have to make sure the add-on is updated. But I'll have to look into that after the stream.
if you just go to the Blender manual and you type glTF into the search, the first thing that pops up should be this glTF 2.0 reference, and getting there will show you everything you need to know about how it has to be set up in Blender.
Hmm.
There's quite a bit of information here, and if you haven't looked at this in a while, maybe you tried it out early on and had trouble with something. I encourage you to go back because they've updated this regularly and have way more tips and notes about how it should be set up, more examples. lots of just screenshots of like how your graph should look, stuff like that. So this is I use this. Obviously I have this bookmarked. I use this a lot because
Yeah,
they
this
get
is a
into
really good reference.
animation and everything else. But rather than have
Yeah,
you
a
read through
lot of
that,
times people asking questions on Discord about how do I do this is just me linking to this to some part of this
yes,
page.
yes,
Um, but yeah, if you don't know about it, it's you would never know this page existed, but it's super useful. They cover kind of how to do um, every single thing. We still admittedly don't fully understand animation stuff, so like
yeah, we were going to
I
talk
think the
about that today,
documentation
and
is a
then we are
little
like,
lacking there.
I got to
Yeah, I
learn
don't
more about it.
but the materials stuff is pretty well documented. Like they kind of go into every aspect there. So that's yeah, that's kind of what we want to cover today.
Yeah.
Is yeah.
So I'm gonna go first. Take well, actually, let's talk about that first. I'm gonna go over to Blender here, and we're gonna just take a look at like how a typical material would be set up. Now, I have my Blender set up so that when I have my scene starting, I've saved my default to like already have a PBR material set up and everything. But I'm gonna pretend like you don't that I don't, and like it would be the way you would have yours. So uh, basically, the graph is a little bit interesting, a little bit different from what you might expect. If you're familiar with Blender, it's not crazy. I'm going to go to the shading layout here and start with a brand new material. Now, we support two different types of materials, two shader types
Mhm.
for hubs. One is the principled BSDF, or otherwise known as a physically based rendering material, and that's kind of the default when you make a material these days in Blender. The other type we support, I've talked about on prior tutorials, is the unlit shader, which I've talked about how I don't really like that name. It's like unlit, but it actually is kind of like fully lit. It depends on how you think of it. Um, in which case you would use a different type of node than this one. But for the type of physically based stuff, the PBR that people talk about, this is what we're going to be using.
Yeah, and
And
PBR is the default for GLTF. The unlit materials are like an extension to GLTF, but it's one that Hub supports.
yeah, and it's worth noting, we don't GLTF doesn't support every single parameter on this thing.
Yeah, in the
Um,
Blender node. Yeah.
some it does actually support like clear coat, with using GLTF extensions. You can actually get
Mhm.
some of this stuff to work. Whether that works in hubs is not.
And then some things are less obvious too. Like I think Emissive, for example, you can't plug into that node if
Yeah,
I'm
the
remembering
emission one
correctly.
isn't working yet, but
You have to do it separately. Like you can do emissive, but you have to create the separate node. Yeah, it's in the Blender docs, but um, there you can't necessarily just directly plug in everything into that node. That's just kind of quirks of the GLTF Blender exporter.
of course now that I've see that Blender the manual says 2.9 on it, I'm wondering because I saw some note that that may have changed, that they might
Mm.
support the emissive node now. I'm looking.
Yeah, we'll have
I'm
to look.
quickly
Yeah,
skimming the doc right now as we speak. I don't think it's supported yet.
I'm pretty sure 2.9 is still in pre or in beta or pre-release, because I think it was supposed to come out the
I
20
probably would have seen today that
something.
that's kind of big news if
I
it's
think it's very soon though. It's this month. It's this month, so I think it's next week if I remember correctly.
okay. Well,
So
so the main things that you're going to be changing on a material are the base color, which you can just use a color like this. You know, Picking some overall color for thing, but really what it's expecting is an image if you have one. So if you have a texture of some sort, that would plug right into base color as an RGB image. And like I'll just do that kind of as a placeholder here. I'll just make a new um, color grid texture. I'll
yeah,
just
Blender
call
can
this
generate some
color
sample images
grid.
for you, which is useful.
I like that. I bet there's a way you can like make your own and populate this list. I would love to do
That'd be
that.
cool.
But anyway, if you make like a little color grid, it's just a 1024 image and plug it in. Let me get out of full screen here. That that would export to GLTF just fine,
Hmm.
and it would have the base color on it. Now, what it would have though is a default roughness. So how shiny this thing is. Uh, right now is controlled by a slider. So if you bring it all the way down, you're talking about something that looks really glossy, really reflective. Now, bear in mind, it's not going to reflect the whole world around it. It's not going to reflect avatars and other objects and
Yeah,
things.
we do set a default environment. So the thing that you are going to see in the reflection is the environment map, and we do set a default environment map from the scene that you've loaded, which we generate from the skybox. So if you have like a skybox that you configure in Spoke, like there's that skybox element, I mean you can configure the different parameters of that and create the skybox. Then when you have a shiny model like this, you're going to see the reflection of the skybox in there. What we don't do, like if for a lot of people, for example, use 360 images, just wrapped around a sphere in Spoke to create a different kind of skybox. That's not going to reflect in the environment map right now. We want to have that as an option
Right,
where you
like
can
this
actually
kind of
specify an
thing.
environment map. Yeah, like you're not going to see that. You're only going to see like the sky that you actually set up in Spoke as the sky map, which or as the skybox.
Right.
Which works for some scenes but doesn't work for others, and so reflective surfaces may look kind of weird. Um,
But you can also use an image for roughness. So
mhm.
you can use a texture that defines what parts are shiny and which parts are not. Um, if you don't need any, I usually just turn roughness all the way up so that it's just
Flat, yeah.
shininess is not an issue at all. Similarly with metallic, metallic is another thing that is supported. Um, Making a surface metallic is and smooth like this, like really gives you that sort of chrome. Uh,
Yeah, you can find there's like the examples with all the spheres or whatever. That's like a good way to see the gradient between
oh yeah, like
fully metal and fully rough.
so you can play with that. But by default, these settings are just pure scalar values like 0 to 1.
Hmm.
But if you have an image, like I don't think this color grid's going to do much for me.
No.
But if I had a another image that had like black and white areas on it or grayscale
Yeah, and we
areas.
use this, for example, on the default robot avatars. Only certain parts of the robot are shiny, and some are more shiny than others. And so you'll if you look at the roughness map for those avatars, you'll see that there's like strips of it that are not that are darker or lighter, depending on how shiny they should be.
Yes. Now the weird thing about plugging in textures to this node is that um, it's kind of expecting that you have an image where different parameters are separated into the red, the green, and the blue channels of the image. And
Yes.
what's in this case we call it an ORM or an uh, occlusion roughness metallic. That's what that stands for, ORM.
Yeah, and the reason, those are all those maps. Those three maps are all like a single channel. Like it's not RGB. It's just gray or yeah, black and white. We can put all three of those into a single texture to just to save space
So
basically.
like this is the robot avatar from Hubs,
Right.
and this is the ORM map. So in Blender, I can actually, instead of viewing it all as one big overlaid image, I can just look at the red. So you can see that's actually the occlusion map.
Hmm.
If I switch to G or green, it's going to show the roughness. This is the one where he's wearing a tie. And then the blue one is what parts are metallic and how metallic they are. So you can see like the tie is like a little bit metallic,
Right.
whereas these areas are very metallic. Yeah, that's right, very metallic, and the black areas are non-metallic.
Yeah, and
Um,
they're in that specific order: ORM, like occlusion, roughness,
yeah.
metalness.
Whereas like with the roughness, you can see there's kind of a tweed pattern on this suit, and it's a little like some areas are shinier and some are less. In the case of a roughness map, if you don't know this, it's kind of like opposite what you might think. Like more rough means like not shiny. So um, the whiter it
Because like a
is,
shiny surface is polished, right? It's not rough.
right. So
It's
the shinier parts are black. In this case, like his belt buckle right here under the tie is darker to be more shiny, more glossy.
Mhm.
So, but you can't just plug this straight in anywhere. You have to do a couple things. Number one, you have to change the color space on this node from red, green, blue because we're not looking at all channels together like this. We change this to non-color. So it's going to use non-color data. This is probably the thing I forget to do the most when I
I
go
don't
to
even know about
export.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can switch it. And it's a here's a really good it's a hot tip. If you change to a different map, it resets this. So you have to like make sure you know if you do change it that you switch it back. Actually, it has a memory. It's like it remembers this was not
I
good.
assume that I think that's probably a property of the image itself.
Yeah, it's like
Eventually,
doing it that
oh,
way. Now
image and
what you
blender.
need to do in order to split this out into the metallic and the roughness parts is add what's called a separate RGB node. That can be found under add converter
And I'm pretty sure.
separate
So like
RGB.
you can actually, if you wanted to, have these as separate maps, and you wouldn't have to do this.
Correct.
But it's definitely better if you can. And all all the models we provide are going to be in this way, and this is a pretty standard technique. So um, uh, combining them together into one map is just better because it's you're only using a single channel anyway.
And
But you can separate
you're
them if you
saving
want.
download time a bit because it's
Hmm.
only one
Hmm.
image instead of three.
Yeah,
So,
download time and actually CPU memory as well, or sorry, GPU memory as well.
all
So
right.
it's definitely useful.
So we know
Um,
that the green is the roughness part, the R. So we plug the green of this separate RGB into the roughness. Let me go full screen on this. And then we plug the blue, which is metallic, into metallic there. Now the this is the weird one, the
mhm.
red, which is the as we just talked about
Occlusion.
the occlusion map, like what's known as ambient occlusion. And if you don't know what that is, that's just the way that you sort of add what's called like self shadowing. So like areas that are in cracks or like under a character's armpits or things like that that you want to look naturally darker than surrounding areas because it occludes or blocks ambient light. That comes out of the R here, the red channel. But I'm going to come back to that one because
Yeah,
making that needs a special node to export. There is no ambient um, input on this shader in Blender. So there's sort of a weird workaround to do that. The glTF documentation that we showed earlier explains exactly what that is and what it's looking for, but we'll get back to that. The last thing
and
that
this is kind of similar to like what we did for light maps too, right? So light maps
yep,
aren't supported in the default Blender BSDF node, so we created a separate node that you pipe things into that then at
this
export
guy.
time it looks at. And so yeah, exactly this thing. So you can pipe something into that, create a light map. There's a similar node, although you have to create it yourself for occlusion maps in the GLTF.
I'll show you the weird way I do it, and I'm sure maybe somebody out there will know a better way. But the last thing I'm going to add to this is the is another image node and load in a normal map. This is like the weirdest thing I'm making because it's a cube, but it has
It's this cube with the robot.
with a
With the
robot
robot,
thing on
it
it. I might as well
it's
keep
fun.
going with this robot thing.
Yeah, at least all the maps line up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the normal map of this, and here's what a normal map looks like if you've never seen one. Uh, Usually looks like this. It is a weird purplish looking image that has some blues and some pinks, like magentas in it. And
Hmm.
this basically is telling uh, the renderer what areas are kind of like bumpy. And so uh, if you're familiar with like a bump map, which is usually just a black and white image, that can work for models. But a normal map actually has more information in it because it has four directions. So it can kind
Yeah,
of
I
tell
mean,
you
so
like,
effectively, what you're doing with a normal map is it's almost like every single pixel of the texture is a triangle, and then each of those triangles can be pointing in a different direction, like they have a different normal, and so the actual color value doesn't mean anything like with the visually, but the R, G, and B map to the X, Y, and Z of that vertex normal. So it's like it's telling it where to point the surface of that kind of imaginary triangle on that pixel. And
like
so it lets you have
there's
like
the
really,
red
really
channel
fine
by
detail.
itself, right? There's
Yeah.
just the red, and then if you switch to the green, you'll see it's almost like the light changes direction. Now you're going to see it like coming from the top because green is treated like that, and blue comes from where does the blue come from? I forget. But
Well, I mean, it's the X, Y, and Z. It's the X, Y, and Z values of the vertex normal. So they kind of happen, or they look. You will see kind of like it look like lighting, just because that's going to be the different surfaces pointing kind of in the same direction. But it's actually just literally a vector encoded into the X, Y, and Z values.
This is kind of
Um,
like the most magic of all maps. Like and it
it would be
adds.
pretty hard to generate these by hand. So I mean, typically, what you do is you take some sort of higher resolution mesh and then generate the normal map from that. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's usually how it's done, unless you're using some other like third-party program like a
To
Substance
procedurally,
Painter
yeah,
or
to
something.
procedurally generate the surface. But like, you wouldn't really be able to paint one of these by hand in Photoshop. That would not it'd be pretty hard.
Challenge accepted. No, I
Yeah,
would not want to do that. That would be terrible.
yeah,
But if the way that's set up is you drop the normal map into an image node like this. Again, you're using non-color data, just like the ORM map that we just did. And then you also need to add a normal map node. Again, that can be found under add. Where the heck is it? Was it a shader thing? See, this is why I make favorites because then I
yeah.
don't have to remember where they all go. So
There's a way to search
yeah,
them
you
as
can just
well,
search
right?
at the top here and type
Yeah,
normal, and then there it is, normal map. Not the one called normal, the one called normal map. You'll know because if you pick the wrong one, the
can
normal one
don't
has like
plug it.
balls on it, and you don't.
Uh,
That's not the one you want. But this regular normal map, and then you just chain that through. You go color to color, and then this normal to normal over here, and now the normal map is actually affecting this object. It's weird because of my UV layout, but there's this tie running along the side there, and his lapels, and
and you'll see, like, if you change the shininess values, and or actually, well, then never mind. You're applying a map now, so
well, I can add a
it's gonna apply
light,
that way.
and you'll see it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if I add a light to my scene, like a little point light here, and I switch to use scene lights and the scene world, right now it looks very dark because the light is hiding. But if I move it out here, oh, look at that. Now you're seeing not only the bumpiness of some of those surfaces, some of them are shinier than others. So there's the belt
right.
buckle right there between. Uh, if I move this guy around, you'll actually see it's shinier on that belt buckle because of
Yeah,
the
and most of like,
roughness.
again, we've I kind of say this every time we're working on stuff in Blender, but most of this stuff is kind of not really hub specific in any way. Well, definitely not hub specific, and mostly not even GLTF specific. Kind of only some of the things are specific to how the GLTF exporter works, but most of the stuff is this is just standard stuff with how PBR materials work, how these physically based materials work.
Yeah,
And so this knowledge you can kind of apply across
yeah. If you're
any
using
engine,
Cinema
any.
4D or something, like
Mhm.
the principles are all the same, and Maya and all that stuff. So um, so that's kind of the basics. Now I didn't do the R here, the occlusion map, because this is the weird one. Uh, it's expecting, and the GLTF group that decided on how to make this work uh, chose this because again there was no input for
Mhm.
the ambient occlusion. I kind of wish they had done it a different way, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And in fact, once you make one of these, you don't have to do it again. In fact, I have it in a quick. I made one called GLTF settings. It's in a little quick menu here. Um, but this is basically a group node. Blender has the concept of being able to group things. So, like for example, you could grab all this stuff and group it. I think it's Control G. And now I'm looking at that in. See how it's
As
like
it kind of as if it was one big node.
yeah, and then when you back out of it, it's like, oh look, I everything's all jammed into one node now.
Yep.
So you can do that to save space and also to sort of consolidate things and make it easier to make like templates of stuff. And
Yeah, and
that
they happen to have made this thing using a group node. I think there are reasons they didn't do it the way we did the light map thing, but I'm not sure. And if those reasons are no longer valid, I want to see if I can, do a pull request and have it be just like the light map node that we have, because I think that's quite a bit more convenient
it
than just
might as
having
well
it in
be
a
a
menu
part of
like
the
that.
importer exporter, right? And then they could just
That's
have
what I mean. Exactly, exactly. So I want to see. I want to look into the history of why they got rid of the custom node type, because I think they did have a custom node type at some point and they got rid of it.
hmm,
Though I think it was they had a custom node type for the entire BSDF thing, and they decided not to do that, and so that they can use the regular BSDF node. And then I think as part of that, they ended up getting rid of this occlusion thing. So
I think
there
my
it might just
guess
be
is
like
that their
historical reasons.
reasoning
And so
was like Wow, look at that! What that looks like when you close it up.
Oh, wow.
I think the reasoning is probably because for people's art pipelines, they didn't want people to have to make like a whole separate
Exactly.
material.
Exactly. So what's nice about the kind of using this principle of the SDF node is that for every like all your regular Blender files just just work, and then the kind of little bits that have to be GLTF specific, you can add those, and they don't really affect anything else, which is pretty nice.
So here's how I make it. It's kind of a weird workaround because you can't make a group node without stuff in it first. And so what I usually do is I start with one of these. I tend to use the one called Gamma because it has very few parameters on it, like this Gamma node. And then I just select it and I immediately group it with Control G. Now I'm inside a group node, that's why it's green, and you can see the graph below it in the background, which is kind of cool. Um, I don't even need this anymore. So once I made this group, I can just delete that guy. And then what I need to do is change the inputs here to be something that the glTF format will recognize. So this is like a weird thing. I know this is kind of odd, but basically what you're going to do is make sure that your settings are open on the side. You can hit N for N as in Nancy, like N over here, and this will open this up. And you can go to node and see the inputs and the outputs listed over here. And this is where you actually edit them. So we don't actually need any outputs. You can select this and hit the X and clear it. I don't need the color one. I'm just going to keep this gamma one and rename it. And you have to call it this occlusion because the glTF exporter is actually going to look for that.
Yeah, and this is in that documentation page we were
Mm-hmm.
covering, and like you said, once you make this, it's probably nice to just add this to your favorites, so you don't have to ever make it again, or add it to your default blend file,
Yep.
so that you can keep it in there.
So this is the
Um,
only thing you need. It doesn't have to be hooked up to the output because there is no output. It's just a dead
yeah,
end
this is
kind of
just a
node.
thing that the GLTF exporter knows to look for, and so if it sees this node named GLTF settings, so you have to name it specifically. If
That's
it sees
that's
this
what I'm going to
node,
do next. So I'm going to go
yeah,
up, back out this little arrow up here in the corner in case you didn't know. Now it's just called node group and it says node group in here. Again, in the settings on the side here, go to the item tab and then it's actually the name doesn't matter. It's really the label. I don't know why.
yeah, and this can
Or
be like
sorry,
pretty
it's
confusing,
it's properties.
and this is like pretty yeah this is pretty confusing, and so when I was doing the light map node, the first version of it I did in the same way using this group node or whatever, and then when you copy this and you paste another one, it might call it like light map settings dot zero one, and then it's not going to find it, and so like this is like pretty error prone, and so like I said, I want to see if I can
Because look,
help
I
improve
just
this.
named this one glTF settings the way it's expecting, and then it renamed my other one .002, and
Right, exactly.
that's not
And
good.
so if you end up copying between materials, you're gonna have a problem. But uh, yeah, this is the way it is right now. It's not that big of a deal, but it's
But
just kind
once
of a
you
little.
make this,
Yep.
you can add it to your favorites, and then you're good to go. Now it has this occlusion input, and it's set to one. You can ignore that value because you're just going to plug the red channel into it, and you're
Hmm.
done. And that's it.
Right.
When I go to X, it doesn't change the look of it up here at
Yeah, I mean
all.
you can plug that into the occlusion map on the BSDF as well, just so that you can see it in Blender. Like plug that R output into it. I think that's
But
okay.
there is no occlusion over here. But I know what you're
Oh,
saying.
there is no occlusion.
Yeah, there's
That's right.
no.
You can add it as like a multiply node or
You
something
could
like
like
that. So you
overlay it or yeah,
right.
multiply it with that. So,
Yeah.
but this is the bare bones like PBR shader graph for GLTF. I mean that's
Yeah.
like as basic as it gets.
And obviously, like all these things are optional. You don't need to have like a normal map and a roughness map, and you don't have to have all those things. They're all optional. But like this would be a full PBR material, is all those things.
So you got the base color, you got the ORM here, and you got the normal. Um, and so that makes it so that and this one being actually three textures in the middle um, means that all in one we're going to have three, four, five different textures that make up the look of our PBR material.
Hmm.
And again, like I said, there are things like clear coat and all that stuff. I actually haven't
And there are also
tried
like
those
other
yet, but
modifiers too you can apply in between these things. Like you can add multiplier like or factors or whatever. This is covered in the in that doc page. There's even a sample graph they show with like all the modifiers applied. Um,
yep.
but yeah, those are all
And those you
optional.
can do with multiply. It's really just a matter of
Mhm.
adding like a mix RGB node and changing it to multiply, and now you've got what they call the factors. It will multiply whatever the color is by this
Right. So you
color.
can tint your image, for example,
Yeah,
and that actually gets applied at runtime too. So like
so
if you
I
are
wanted this
creating
more
a
purple, and I like turned it up, and
if you're creating like a custom hubs client or something like that and you want to modify this at runtime, that factor can actually be modified at runtime without having to like generate a new image. um,
but yeah, I again encourage you to read the docs and the Blender docs and understand those a little better, and also the glTF docs will explain what there's base color factor and emissive factor. Oh, I forgot emissive.
oh yeah,
Speaking of
we
which,
should talk about that one
um,
because that one
yeah,
specifically someone was
this
asking
one
about
is
the other day too.
a little funky. Same idea. You can either just make the whole thing like an emissive color, or you can use a texture. If you're just doing a color, you're going to add a node called emissive. Where is it? It's under. I forget where it is, but I have it in my favorites. I'm terrible. Let's see. Emission. It's an emission node, and the emission node can uh, have a color or and a strength, but you can also plug a texture into it. So, for example, if I wanted this same texture, the color, the base color, to
Yeah,
be
I mean
the emission.
the bot one has
Look
we
at that!
have
I
an
just
emissive
drew it
map for
with
the
a
bot too.
line instead of connecting it. That was so stupid. Wait, how do I get rid of that? Where's the eraser? Oh, there it is. Eraser. Get out of here. That was a mistake. Yeah, you go like you could like plug the same color in, and then output it. Now, the way you make it work is you can think of these two as equal. There's the emission part and the BSDF part. You need to mix these two shaders together. And there's a node called mix shader, and you plug them in, one, two, and then have that go out.
Yeah, no,
Leave it
I'm
at,
not really sure why they can't just use the like because the BSDF shader does have emissive, I think. So I'm not sure why you can't just plug directly into that, but I'm
it's
pretty
because it
sure.
came later. This
Yeah,
didn't get made until like Blender 2.8
got it. So that it
7
just
or something
predates it.
like some yeah.
That makes sense.
But doing this now, this you can see it's like all lit up with the same color as this. The cool thing is you can actually turn that higher, and that'll get exported. So if you
Yeah,
really want it
and
to look blown out,
we use this on the robot avatars for their eyes and their the chest screen is glowing. And so like even if they're in a dark room without lighting, the eyes and the chest will glow because of the emissive map.
so here's the actual, and you set that one to RGB, like a standard RGB color. Um, Now it's using emissive, and the emissive texture, like you said, is really just the eyes. You can see them here lit up
Hmm.
on the robot. So somewhere along here, there's going to be a part that looks lit up, if I'm not mistaken. You know what it is? There's no part of it that's on the UV map right now. Look,
Mm.
they're up in the corners there.
Ah, yeah. Well, you can just
But I
move
could
the
move this over just so like one of the eyes shows up, and then now when I go back, you'll see it somewhere. Where's the lit up eyeball? Oh, there it is. Looks terrible.
yeah.
Thanks. I hate it.
And
Okay.
you can change the factor on there as well so that it'll
Yep. You
um,
could add a multiply here afterward, like
yep.
a mix RGB, and set it to multiply. Where are you? Multiply. Um, oh, sorry. I have to do that before the emission because this is a shader output, not a color
Right.
output. I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on for Blender that comes with Blender, which makes me be able to do stuff like hold Alt and just pull this out, and it'll like reconnect
Oh,
automatically.
that's cool.
It's really cool. It has a bunch of other features like being able to like auto mix, like this mix I could have done. It's really cool. Like you hold Alt and then you like uh, right click and then do that, and then it that didn't do what I wanted. I don't know. There's like I haven't learned all the little hotkeys, but there's like all these cool things you can do that'll like auto just like make nodes for you and stuff. But so yeah, so now there's a factor here between the image and the emission, and I
Right. And so
could
you can
like
multiply it by a color.
make the eyeballs like glow red or something if I
Yep.
wanted to. And
And yeah, so I mean, I think this basically covers most of the common issues we get asked about materials, except one of the big ones we get asked about all the time, transparency. So yeah,
transparency.
we should talk about it. It's a slightly big topic, but I think the first kind of part to it is okay. Well, how do I even make my materials transparent in Blender? Because that's where it's going to start.
Yep. So yeah, that one is tricky because it really is going to rely on an image first of all. So it needs an image that has an alpha channel, or
Hmm.
if not an alpha channel, then at least like transparency. Like a PNG can have a trans. It doesn't technically. It's not an alpha channel. PNG is a weird format, but um, you can see that the base color, for example, has this alpha. If the image, I did it again. If the image, if, if the image had an alpha channel, that transparency information could be output from here, and it would actually get plugged right into the alpha, which is here. Right now, I'm
Hmm.
controlling it completely with a single slider, so that would do this to the object. Let's bring it around here. That would make the thing like semi-transparent, which isn't
Well,
drawing well in here,
Well, we
but
need to also make the configure the transparency mode for the material, right?
yes, that's the part that everybody seems to miss. They go, "Oh well, look, I made it like 50% transparent. Why isn't
Yeah.
it working?" And that is done through the properties over here on the side. Again, the letter N if you hit, and then go to Options. When you're inside a material, here are settings that are really important for you. Number one, backface culling. Do you ever make a
Oh
scene
yeah,
and
this.
you
Yeah.
you do or don't want to be able to see it from the inside or the outside? That will do that for you if it's culling back faces. And the same goes in hubs. Like if you don't want to see all the other sides of all the faces of things, you can turn that on and it will not draw uh, the back face.
Yeah, and so you can set it to both front or back side, and they're kind of you might want to use one or the other, just depending on what your model looks like. But those settings will fully transfer over into the GLTF and into hubs.
So like if this top were missing on the object, you can see it better now. Now it's culling or not drawing those back faces. But if you do want that, then you would leave that
And you can
off.
set it to the opposite too. So like it's just going to render the back faces if you wanted like a to just see inside the shape.
Wait, how would I do that? I don't
Is
know how
that
to
not
do
an
that.
option? Oh, I thought that was
No,
an option. Oh.
no. Well,
Well,
I
it's
would
an
just
option.
you could just
It's an option in hubs,
you could just flip the
like
normals.
in yeah, you could just flip the normals, I guess.
So
Um,
that's important. The other one that's really important though is the blend mode, and this is really the key to
yeah.
transparency. So I don't have transparency on this, but I will turn the alpha down right now just so it would like fade the whole thing out. That's not actually going to show or export properly until you set the blend mode to one of these alpha types. Um, there are only two that are supported by glTF: Alpha Blend and Alpha Clip, sometimes known as Alpha Test. You might see that term somewhere else, but Blend is the one that gives you the soft, sort of semi-transparent look. Now, the
Hmm.
reason I'm showing this first is because that's usually the one that people want. The bad news about it is that this can cause all kinds of problems in terms of rendering. The other one is Alpha Clip, where you specify this
Yeah,
clip
that's not really going
threshold.
to work on this. Like
It,
you need a gradient of values here, so it's not gonna work great on
this
this.
won't do
You'll need
anything
maybe.
except turn completely off or completely on.
Yeah, but this actually demonstrates pretty well what it's doing. By setting it to alpha clip, you're setting a specific threshold. So it's either going to be completely transparent or completely opaque, and you're setting the alpha value at which that happens. And so when the alpha value of the pixels in the image are greater than the alpha clip value, it's not going to get clipped, and when it's below, it will. And so you can see here, you set it to a specific value, and then if you change that slider, which is effectively kind of making a fully, if you set the slider in the BSDF node, which is kind of effectively making an image that is either that has a specific alpha value, you'll see when it matches the cutoff threshold, it's gonna go completely opaque. Um,
yeah. If
and
I
so
used an actual image though,
yeah, if you have some sort of transparent image, that would probably be a good
let's
thing to
throw an
show.
image on here. Oh man, no, don't put it in between. I didn't want to do that. Let's slide it over here a little bit. Oh, you son of a! It's like automatically doing that. Let me reorganize my graph a little bit here. That's better.
You keep your graph tidy. It's important.
Oh, by the way, just in case, I want to give another shout out to that Node Wrangler plugin. You can do this really sweet thing. You're gonna like this, Dom, because it's gonna just being sort of particular about you know how things are laid out. You can hold Shift and then right click swipe through one of these wires anywhere, like here, whoop,
Hmm.
and it makes like these little extra dots. So
Oh,
you can
that's cool.
like,
So now
if
you can
you don't
route
like
them.
these diagonals, a
You
lot
can
of
make it look
people,
like a circuit board. Like
yeah, you can do like this kind of action where you go, oh, I want it all like, you know,
that's cool.
nicely laid out or
I
whatever.
could see some people getting very, very
Way too into
particular
that.
about this.
Um,
Yeah, just
but what's
like
really cool too now is that because a lot of times you're like zooming in and zooming way out to like plug things. Now when you unplug this, like it stays on that dot,
right, right, right.
so that you could just like test and plug it
Yep,
back in. So I
that
really
makes a
like
lot of
that.
sense.
Node Wrangler, it comes with Blender. Just turn it on in your add-ons. Uh, so then anyway, so if I have an image texture that has alpha, so I happen to have some pictures that I have saved that have alpha in them that I use for testing things. So like for example, there is an image of I actually don't know what this image is. I should probably look first. Don't worry, it's safe for work. Okay, it's like these dice, right? There's like a common test image, has some transparency in it. The background is transparent. Um, when that is plugged in, when you take its alpha and plug it into the alpha channel here, what you're going to see on the object when it's set to alpha clip right now is that very sort of binary digital, like, is it on or is it off? And as I scrub
And
through this,
you should plug that map into the base color too, just so that we can see it line up.
oh, good idea. Let's plug that in.
Yeah, we're doing everything all in one
All right,
material
so
here.
you're
It's a little
seeing parts
confusing,
of
but
those dice
yeah.
laid out on here. As I play with the alpha clip value, it's kind of going, well, I think that's like a visible pixel. So
Right.
it's easy to get the background to go away, so that's nice. But if you're trying to get like a fine soft edge, you're never going to get it because they're either on or off, like
Mhm.
each pixel. It's not going to be semi-transparent, but it makes it very cheap for rendering, as opposed to Alpha Blend, where you don't get a slider and it's just going to use the actual transparency settings of the image. But you can see even in Blender, it has some trouble resolving sometimes like what's in front of what,
Yeah, I
um,
mean the main thing you're going to run into with Alpha Blend is with overlapping things.
like
So
that.
within the same object or
Or
within different objects, you're going to end up with issues. And we can quickly go over kind of like why that happens. But the but basically only use Alpha Blend if you need to is kind of the thing. Like if you can
yep,
get away with using Alpha Clip, it's going to be more performant and just you're going to run into less issues with overlapping with other things.
look how well it
Um,
overlaps. No
yeah.
flickering
So,
between them or
but by
anything.
default, like I said, Blender's just going to have it set to completely opaque. And so, if you drag something to the alpha channel and you're confused as to why it didn't do anything, yeah, you have to go change that in the materials.
So let's go.
Um,
Let's take a break out of Blender for a second.
hmm.
But Dom, we were like, oh, we don't have a whole hour to fill up. We've done it. We
Yeah.
always do. It's okay. I'd rather people understand this. So let's move. I'm gonna switch over to back to our web view here, and I'm gonna go to a scene, a typical scene that you might pull from Sketchfab. Like, I want to turn this into a hub scene, and I found this thing called house scene, which looks really cool. It's got a little house and a little kind of cartoony car, and there's a cat sitting on the porch. And one of the things I really liked about this were like these really organic looking like vines going up the roof. It's got leaves all over the roof, and then it has this tree over here made of a bunch of leaves, and then like even kind of almost like a bush of vines back here going up. Um, this is again like I usually do. I inspect it first. I go check it out. Is this pretty low poly? Yeah, it's pretty good. Um, but it does have opacity in it, and that's how they manage to do all the transparent parts. But I know for a fact that when I drag this into hubs, it's not going to give me exactly what I want. And here's what it looks like in hubs. Now I just dragged the model into this window directly from this. I dragged the Sketchfab link right into this window, and again, it converted it from the glTF, which is really great, into a GLB. Um, sort of looks okay. The vine, look at that. Not so great
Yeah, it's
there.
going to kind of depend on what angle you're looking
Some
at
Z
it.
fighting. They call it Z fighting. It's like Z is depth. But really, where you're going to see problems are when these start overlapping each other. You can see those guys want to flicker a lot, but the worst offender is this tree because it's made out of a bunch of. Let's go back real quick. It's made out of. If I go to wireframe, it's made out of a bunch of cards like this. Now, the Sketchfab renderer handles this stuff really nicely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure what they're built upon or if they did their own proprietary thing, but
Yeah, I think they have their own render, and the obvious question is like, okay, well, why can Sketchfab render it and Hubs can't? So there's different trade-offs you have to make in terms of performance, mostly. Um, like, there's not really any good completely general purpose solutions for transparency, like order independent transparency. Like, this is kind of like sort of unsolved problem.
it's like a
There are,
video game problem.
yeah, there are better
Graphics
and worse
problem.
solutions depending on how much you want to like performance you want to plug into it or dedicate to it. In hubs, we just do kind of the fastest, most performant thing, which is we do sort objects, but I don't know per object level. Um, and we can if you I don't know if you have those images I sent you, Jim. We can like really quickly go over like
Oh yeah, I like that.
why is this a problem to begin with.
In case you
Um,
didn't notice what's happening on my screen, like those vines on the wall, because they have transparency in them, when they are behind another transparent thing, it has trouble. It basically is discarding the
Yeah, I mean
pixels back
it's
here.
as if there was nothing like if you imagine that you were rendering that thing not in a non-transparent way, like you're rendering that whole plane, right? You would not be able to see the house behind it. And so the house doesn't render because it's like, well, I'm behind something, I'm not going to render at all. Um, Unfortunately, the thing that it is behind is a transparent thing, but it doesn't fully know that. And that's because it's sorting at the object level. So it's this whole scene is a single object, and so it can't say that okay, this tree is in front of this house. It's just looking at the center of the objects.
It's drawing them
Um,
all at once, right? It can't say I'm going to draw this part first, and
right,
then I'll render
exactly.
this on top of it, and then I'll
Exactly.
render.
And if there were separate models, they could. But even if they're separate models, you can end up with issues with, okay, well, part of this plane is in front and part of it is behind, and so you're always going to have have issues with overlapping, even if you break it down further. But
And
yeah, if you
these are
bring up
using
those
and that's how you know these are using Alpha Blend
right,
because
yeah, Alpha Clip won't have this
this
issue.
problem is happening. So let's look at your image examples. This one is the back to front one, I think. Is that the one you want to see first, or the front to back?
Uh, Yeah, this one is like the correct case. So it's like, okay, what you actually want to do is you want to render each object sorted back to front. And so like you see the transparency there looks correct. It's like, okay, the A and the B are overlapping correctly and you don't see anything weird. Um, this is what we want everything to look like. And we try to sort objects in this way so that this happens. But you know, a lot of times it's not gonna actually sort fully correctly. And then you're gonna get something that looks more like the second image, which is um, where you end up see it like this is exactly what we see in hubs, right? Like we're seeing through to the background. And the reason this happens is because like when that object renders, um, now as the next object comes to render, it thinks there's already something there because it's written into the depth buffer, um, which which is how computer graphics or how GPUs decide whether they should draw something or not, like whether something is in front of something else. I'm giving like a really, really
Rough. That's all
hand
right.
wavy
That's all right.
explanation here, but like, um, but basically, it thinks there's already something there, so it's not going to draw anything because it's like, okay, well, something's overlapping here, um, and so this is like the exact thing you end up seeing, and yeah, so it's just a problem you have to deal with. There are things we could do in hubs to kind of make this happen maybe less if we were willing to sacrifice some performance for it, or there are lots of stuff, but bottom line, this is kind of just something you have to think about when you're doing games. This is like really common in most engines. If you're making something in Unity or Unreal or whatever, by default, unless you do something specific to try and solve this, you're going to run into these issues. And so this is just like a generally good thing to know about. Like overlapping stuff is kind of overlapping transparent things is tricky, and it's also, even if you do it correctly, is expensive because you're having to render both things. You're having to render, okay, everything behind it, and then also render the transparent thing.
The
So
worst case is
um,
like a window looking through a window, looking through another window,
right,
looking at a
yeah, I mean that
transparent
could be like a
leaf
really,
texture.
exactly, like that could be really bad. Even if you have that all working performance wise, you're redrawing those same pixels over and over and over again.
When I worked on
um,
game art for like a AAA game, the I mean, we specifically would give guidelines on the design side about like, in this level, this window can't be lined up with that window because it's not going to
right,
draw right, or it's going to just
right,
the frame rate's going to drop if you're looking through
exactly.
too many transparent things at once. It's just a common
Yeah, so this is just something that 3D art, it's part of 3D art. um, but yeah, if you can get away with using this alpha clip thing, you're gonna avoid having to think about these problems. And it's not going to work for every single scenario. And we're also not saying like never use alpha blending, because it looks great and for certain things. You just have to be aware of the limitations.
exactly. So I just downloaded from Sketchfab that that house scene, and I'm gonna go into Blender now, and I'm gonna try to pull it in, and maybe possibly fix that problem. The cool thing is that if I pop real quick back to Blender, one thing that or sorry, to Sketchfab, one thing that I really like is their viewer. I've talked about their model inspector before, so you can see like how the thing is set up. This can be helpful in just finding which texture or which material is the one with transparency. So I
Hmm.
often will go to like 3D plus 2D view, and then let's switch to the opacity channel here, and now it'll
And
show
the
me like
Sketchfab viewer is so nice.
it'll show the list. There it is. It's the one called. This was obviously made in Maya. This is called Lambert 14, which is probably the default name of the material. So I'm going to be looking for Lambert 14 when I bring it in uh, back into Blender. So if I go back to Blender here and I file import the glTF, and I go to where, I know you can't see this, but I'm just navigating to where I downloaded it, and this is just called house scene. This is a glTF I imported. There's a bunch of extra junk you don't need. We've talked about this before, but let's turn on texture mode so we can see it. Look at that. Pretty cool. Um, you might actually see the same transparency. Oh, even worse in some ways. Some transparency problems in Blender. So just to show you, that is not just a Hub's
Yeah, like I
symptom.
said, this is a very very common thing, just about how it's to do with just how modern computer graphics works. Like the whole depth buffer thing is just has issues with the transparency. It's like a big trade off we made when we figured out how to do computer graphics well. This was not one of the things that we figured out, and so it's there are techniques to do it better, but it's you have to specifically be um, accounting for that.
So let's see. So what I'm going to do is go to the shading tab here so that I can see the different materials. And this tree, for example, is using Lambert 14 underscore base color PNG. And you can see that the importer managed to figure this out. Color goes into base color, and alpha is going to alpha. So that's correct. However, you'll also see over here on the side the blend mode that it's using. I'm going to blow this up so you can see it a little better. Is alpha blend. And
Hmm.
that is what's making this look the way that it is. As soon as I switch this to alpha clip and then play around with this slider for a minute, like, oh, look at that. It just kind of fixed it. Uh, I also don't like that this model is like kind of glossy. That's why it looks so
Yeah,
cloudy right now. I'm going to
yeah,
turn.
it doesn't look great. Like in Sketchfab, this scene probably just doesn't have an environment map, and so you don't it doesn't look glossy. But then when you apply the environment map that's in Blender right now, like this skybox, it's going to look a little weird.
So this
Um,
is actually that image over on the side, and you can see it has alpha because of the checkers in the background. If you want to just turn on the alpha and only see that, there it is. And this is actually has a pretty nice crisp line around it. I'm surprised they
mhm.
made it alpha blend to begin with. This is like
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people may just do that without even thinking
it's a
about it.
default.
Honestly, it
Yeah.
might be the defaults, and so.
So as I
Um,
play with the clip threshold, you could actually like clip into the leaves and stuff more. There's not much here to affect. So if there had been sort of a fuzzy edge, yeah, you'd get
mhm.
more of this. See how like the edge is kind of grimy now.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's going to happen with just like anti-aliasing. If you're making when you're making assets, like when you're making your textures, you can account for this, right? So like if you know that you're going to make a transparent thing and you're going to use alpha clip, you would make it so that you actually have hard edges. Like
Hard, don't have
don't have
gray.
values that are transparent that way. Like
Yeah,
at
like
least not alpha
these.
channel. Yeah, like
Um,
don't exactly don't
so
feather
like
your alpha.
so like these leaves over here, which actually have potentially a different material on them. No, they have the same material. I just fixed those too by playing with this. See, like they were kind of. I'm gonna pull that in a bit. Now, the fighting you're seeing between these different leaves is not because of alpha
Yeah,
settings at
that's
all.
just Z
They're just
fighting.
all
Like
right on top of each other or
yep.
like intersecting the roof a little bit, and could
And we
probably
actually had someone asking about this too
they could be pulled
recently.
out a little bit or
Just generally the concept of Z fighting. I mean, that's basically like just when you have things like when you have objects that are just too close to each other. Um, when you're rendering each of the pixels, you might get a different result for whether this object should be behind, like which one should be in front, which one should be behind, just kind of due to like rounding and stuff. So you just want to have a little bit of space between objects. It's a kind of an imprecise thing, but if you're going to have two things that are near each other, just have a little gap.
hmm Now, in the case of these houses and stuff, I'm going to do the same thing where I turn the roughness up, just so that uh, I'm not going to see this like glossy looking thing. How many materials are in here? I don't know. It looks like yeah, there's not that many. If I just go through some of them and turn them up, ideally this would have more consolidated materials, for
Yeah, and there's
performance.
also
But
we already I
we've
think on the
covered all
YouTube
that.
channel, yeah, we have on the YouTube channel stuff about how to optimize your materials, and some of this was reviewed too. I think overlapping with those videos, but I think having a resource when someone is just asking about how do I materials, if we can point them at this video, I think this kind of covers all the all the things you might want to know about configuring a material in Blender
Yeah.
for GLTF export.
All right. So that's kind of closer to what I want. From here, I could just go ahead and do a straight export as is. Uh, I could just go to export as GLTF. I'm not going to, you're not going to see this dialog because of
Where you're
OBS and the way
recording.
this works. But if I'm going to go export to the same folder where that house is living here, and I'm just going to call it like my export, and leave all the defaults for the exporter. And then we are going to go back to hubs. I have this hub scene running, and I still have the old one there that came right from Sketchfab with the weird blending problems. And instead, I'm going to drag and drop the one I just made. It's about 12 megs, probably because of texture files, but uh, depending on how fast my internet is, oh, there it is. Okay, I just need to resize it a bit. You can see this one is already uh, acting
Yeah,
nicer.
way
First of all,
way
it's not
nicer.
it's not glossy, which is nice because like the sun was kind of affecting those surfaces in a way I didn't like. And I'm just going to pin this in place so I can fly up to it. And now Alpha Clip saved the day, and it's cheaper because of
hmm
that. It's a little easier on your GPU, a little easier on rendering. So Alpha Clip is your friend if you can use it. Now, it's never going to solve the problem of like, oh, I want semi-transparent windows. Okay, well,
Yeah, and that you just kind of have to solve by being creative about how you position things
and your
and
design. I mean, you may
yep,
decide like
exactly.
on my building over here, I just don't use glass. I just leave
hmm
the windows open and it's fine. But
Yeah, exactly.
you may want that. I don't know. Or like on this car, maybe you want that. I don't know. But
Um, and then I think the only other thing we should quickly cover with transparency, just because we're coming up on well,
mm-hmm.
going a little bit over time too. Just in Spoke, you can now for images specify the transparency mode. So
Aha.
there was a really common problem in hubs. A lot of people like to use 360 photos as their backgrounds, and by default, everything you bring into hubs or and Spoke before all images you brought in were by default alpha blend. They were considered transparent because we didn't know whether you were going to use a transparent image or not. So we kind of just like defaulted to making it transparent so that people wouldn't be confused.
I don't know.
What we do now, though, is anything new you create in Spoke. So old scenes will still kind of have the same behavior if you had created them in the past. But any new image element you create will be default fully opaque. And so when you're creating a skybox or something like that, now you won't have these issues with transparency anymore that you might have had in the past. But if you specifically want transparency because you're making something that you need transparency on, you can now configure the transparency mode, and it's just like the settings in Blender.
Here's an
You have
image. You can set it opaque, blend, or mask. Mask is the same as
another thing is
clip
clip. Yep,
with a cutoff value.
yep.
So
And
if
we use the word mask here because that's what the glTF spec uses, but they all kind of mean the same thing.
so, I'll find some transparent PNG here um, on the old internet. Oh, this dog. Yeah. Okay, so this guy, I'm going to visit here. Let me copy the image location. Then I'll go back over here. I'm going to paste it over this URL, which is the
Is that actually
default.
transparent?
Yeah,
Okay.
and right now it's set to clip. It's set to mask, right? Um, but you could set it to opaque, and then it'll just have a terrible looking background like that because it wasn't meant to. Blend would do this, but you're going to have the sorting issues if you
Right, and
duplicate.
you may
If you have a
like
couple of
if you need
these,
that for something, then you need it. But the
they may
default
not.
one you should try to jump to is the mask
Yeah,
if you need
you might have
transparency.
some issues with that, but
Yeah, I mean
setting
they're going to look fine as long as like those are two separate objects, and so they're going to sort correctly there. But if you get them close to each other, kind of on top of each other, where it's kind of going to be ambiguous where the center of the object is, that's when you'll start seeing issues.
yeah, especially when they're like overlapping, on top of each
Exactly.
other like that.
This is
If
exactly where
these
you'll
are set
see.
to blend, uh, their pivot point is in the same exact spot, so the computer's having trouble knowing. Well, wait, which one's in front? I don't
Right,
know.
exactly. It won't. One of them is going to be in front sometimes, and the other is going to be in front other times, and so that's exactly when you're going to run into this issue.
But again,
Um,
mask or clip as we call it,
yeah,
and adjusting the cutoff. See, like it had a little bit of a haze around him or her. I don't know
yeah.
what. When I play with that alpha cutoff, I can actually like kind of what do they call that in green screening? When you it's not trimming, it's I forget adjusting like the bleed
Hmm.
um, of the pixels like that. So you can solve some problems that way and get something better. I'll do the same on this one. So I turn it up like less of a haze around it. So those will sort just fine now.
Yeah, exactly. And so now, if you have some old spoke scenes that you had created and you were having issues with them, you can now go in and adjust them because by default, any old scenes will retain their old behavior just in case we didn't want to break old
It'll probably be
people's
blend,
people's
right,
old
as the
scenes, but
default.
it'll be set to blend by default. But if you have an old scene that you were having issues with, you can go back in there and change it now, and it should it should just work better.
Yep. Um, if I were gonna off the top of my head put you on the spot, Dom, how hard would it be on this parameter to add a backface call? Like maybe you don't want to see the
For
backface.
images, yeah, no, for images, I think that would be pretty easy.
That might
Um,
be cool to have because I could
yeah.
see wanting to do that for some special like decal or something where you don't
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't ever want to see the back of it. I don't know, just an idea. Uh,
Yeah, that'd be pretty easy.
that's why
And
they.
then people have also asked about this for videos. We don't have that right now. I don't know of any. I don't know if video formats have alpha channels that the video formats that are supported in browsers. If there are any that also have alpha channels,
Not
but
really.
if there are, it should be relatively easy to support.
Yeah, it's really the codec. Most codecs that we support
Yeah,
don't support alpha
I don't know if
channels.
they actually have alpha channels. There might be some that do, but I'm not sure. Um, and yeah, this should work. I think for 360 photos as well. So just the
Yeah,
projection mode.
materials, transparency. What else? I guess we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, I think this will be good. We'll get this up on the YouTube channel too, and cut it up into slices. And so I think this will be a good resource to point people out when they have questions about how to materials.
Yeah, that's I think probably all we're going to cover today. unless there's any questions coming in or anything. I don't know if anybody's even watching us. Who knows?
Yeah, we
It's
still have a
okay.
couple people
I just,
who
I
have
just
stuck
talk
around.
because I like talking to Dom. It's fine.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Dom, thanks for joining us today. We really today, especially your expertise on graphics and how some of these formats work is really
Hmm.
helpful. I think for people to I know a lot of people that may watch this are more like me. They're more art focused and thinking more just about design and the end result. But you know, it's kind of unavoidable. You kind of have to learn a little bit about some of the nitty gritty and the
Hmm.
image formats and just how this stuff works. It actually can save you a lot of time and frustration
Yeah,
if
just
you
understanding
understand it.
how why yeah why something is rather than just guessing. It actually ends up being easier to understand. So.
Right. But yeah, if you have other questions and stuff, of course, ask away. Like either in our GitHub discussions or on our Discord.
Mhm.
We hope to see more people there and making cool stuff, and maybe your stuff will get featured in the next one of these that we do if you make something cool. So I think that's it for today. But thanks again, Dom, and
Yeah,
thanks everyone for watching. And we'll see you
thanks.
probably next week. All right.
Have
Bye
a good one.
bye.